The Galactic Conservation Station hung in space like a gleaming metallic donut, orbiting the rust-colored planet Drakmor Prime with all the confidence of a tourist taking selfies at a funeral. Which, considering the current situation aboard the station, wasn't far from the truth. Commander Hollis pushed through the pneumatic doors of Bay 12 with the kind of stride that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy, preferably somewhere with decent coffee and fewer panicking aliens. Her weathered hands carried a single duffel bag, because when you've spent 15 years wrangling the universe's most temperamental creatures, you learn to pack light and expect the worst. Ah, Commander Hollis. The voice belonged to Station Director Amox, a Zentorian whose blue-scaled head bobbed with the enthusiasm of someone trying very hard not to admit complete failure. His forearms gestured wildly, a sure sign that things had gone from bad to catastrophically worse since their last transmission. Thank the cosmic winds you're here. We have a situation that is, well, it's... Let me guess, Hollis interrupted, setting down her bag with a thud that seemed to echo through the pristine corridors. The dragon cubs still aren't eating. Your expert team of xenobiologists is scratching their collective heads, and you're about 6 hours away from explaining to the Galactic Council why you let the last 3 members of an ancient species starve to death on your watch. Amox's facial tentacles twitched, the Zentorian equivalent of a nervous laugh. Your reputation for directness precedes you, Commander. My reputation for solving impossible problems precedes me, too, which is why I'm here instead of enjoying my retirement on Luna Colony. Hollis shouldered her bag again. So, where are the little guys? As they walked through the station's gleaming corridors, Amox launched into what could only be described as a verbal catastrophe report. The 3 dragon cubs, the absolute last of their kind, mind you, had been discovered 3 weeks ago in a hidden cavern system on Drakmor Prime. Their species, the Drakmor Ancients, were thought to have been extinct for over 2 centuries. Sapient, telepathically gifted, and possessing the kind of ancient wisdom that made philosophers weep with envy. We brought them here immediately, Amox continued, his voice rising with each word. The finest facilities, the most advanced nutritional programs, expert caretakers from 18 different species. And they haven't eaten a single bite in 8 days, Hollis finished. Right? 8 days, 14 hours, and 36 minutes, came a crystalline voice from behind them. Hollis turned to see Nexia, one of the crystalline advisors, whose translucent body sparkled with what could charitably be called frustrated efficiency. I've calculated their nutritional matrices down to the molecular level. Their dietary requirements should be perfectly met by our synthesized protein compounds. Should be, Hollis repeated, savoring the words like a fine wine. I love it when scientists use phrases like should be when dealing with living creatures. Really inspires confidence. Nexia's crystalline structure flickered. Definitely not a happy sparkle. I'll have you know that my nutritional programs have successfully sustained over 400 different species. My methods are scientifically sound. I'm sure they are, Hollis said, in the tone one might use to compliment a child's finger painting. Tell me, in all your scientific soundness, did anyone think to ask the cubs what they actually want? The corridor fell silent except for the gentle hum of life support systems. Amox's tentacles went rigid, and Nexia's glow dimmed considerably. They're animals, Amox stammered. Intelligent animals, certainly, but animals nonetheless. They don't have preferences beyond basic survival instincts. Hollis stopped walking. She turned to face the station director with the kind of expression that had made grown Klingons reconsider their life choices. Director Amux, in my 15 years of xenobiological fieldwork, I have learned one universal truth that transcends species, intelligence levels, and even dimensional barriers. Are you ready for this profound wisdom? Both aliens leaned forward despite themselves. Every living creature in this universe is more complex than whatever box you try to put it in. Hollis resumed walking, especially the ones smart enough to be insulted by your assumptions. They passed through several more corridors, each more sterile and intimidating than the last. The station was impressive, Hollis had to admit. State-of-the-art environmental controls, adaptive habitat chambers, and enough monitoring equipment to make a paranoid android jealous. It was exactly the kind of place that would drive any self-respecting creature absolutely insane. Here we are, Amox announced, gesturing toward a massive viewing window that looked into what could only be described as the galaxy's most expensive prison cell disguised as a habitat. Hollis approached the window and felt her heart do something that experienced xenobiologists weren't supposed to let their hearts do. It broke just a little bit. 3 dragon cubs, each about the size of a large earth dog, lay scattered across the artificial landscape like discarded toys. Their scales, which should have gleamed with health, were dull and listless. One was curled into a tight ball near the far wall. Another lay sprawled beside an untouched food dispenser, and the third simply stared at nothing with eyes that held far too much intelligence for comfort. "Beautiful, aren't they?" Nexia said, mistaking Hollis's silence for admiration. "The scales are naturally iridescent, and their neural capacity tests indicate intelligence levels comparable to most adult sapient species." "They're dying," Hollis said quietly. "Well, yes, technically they are experiencing nutritional decline, but—" "They're dying," Hollis repeated, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made junior officers stand up straighter. "Not from lack of food, from lack of hope." She pressed her hand against the viewing window, and something remarkable happened. The cub that had been staring at nothing suddenly lifted its head. For just a moment, their eyes met through the transparent barrier, and Hollis felt something she hadn't experienced in years of working with alien species, a connection that transcended the need for words or even common biology. "How many people have tried to feed them?" she asked. 18 specialists, Amox replied proudly. "We've had nutritionists from the Crystalline Advisory Board, behavioral specialists from the Tentacle Consortium, even brought in Unit 9 from the Synthetic Intelligence Division. The finest minds in xenobiology have attempted." 18 strangers walked into their space, poked at them, ran tests, and shoved food at them without bothering to earn their trust first, Hollis translated. "And you're surprised they decided to go on a hunger strike?" "Hunger strike?" Nexia's voice reached a pitch that made the viewing window vibrate. "Commander, these are non-human entities. They don't possess the cognitive framework for organized protest behavior." Hollis turned away from the window with a smile that was equal parts amusement and pity. "Nexia, honey, let me tell you something about intelligent creatures. The smarter they are, the more creative they get when they want to tell you exactly what they think of your hospitality." As if summoned by her words, the cub near the food dispenser, a magnificent creature with scales that shifted from deep gold to burnished copper, raised its head and fixed its gaze directly on the group at the window. Then, with what could only be described as deliberate contempt, it knocked over the food dispenser with one powerful swipe of its tail. The message was unmistakable. Thanks, but no thanks. They've been doing that every time we refill the dispensers, Amox admitted, his voice deflating like a punctured balloon. Unit 9 calculated it as random behavioral expression due to stress, but you're starting to think it's not random at all, Hollis finished. Good. That means you're smarter than I gave you credit for. She studied the habitat more carefully, noting the pristine condition of everything except the areas where the cubs had clearly and purposefully made their displeasure known. Claw marks on the walls, knocked over equipment, and what looked suspiciously like bite marks on the monitoring devices. They're not just refusing to eat, she murmured, more to herself than to her companions. They're actively rejecting everything you're offering them. The question is why? Perhaps, came a new voice from behind them. They simply require a more direct approach. Hollis turned to see Gorth, the station's head of security, approaching with the confident swagger of someone who had never met a problem that couldn't be solved with the right amount of force. His tentacled bulk filled the corridor, and his multiple eyes gleamed with what he probably thought was clever insight. Direct approach? Hollis asked, though her tone suggested she already knew she wasn't going to like the answer. Sedation followed by force-feeding, Gorth explained matter-of-factly. We maintain their nutritional requirements while bypassing their behavioral difficulties. The silence that followed was the kind that usually preceded either enlightenment or violence. Hollis chose enlightenment, though it was a close call. Gorth, she said, using the same tone one might use to explain basic physics to a particularly slow child, let me make sure I understand your brilliant plan. You want to drug 3 telepathically gifted, highly intelligent creatures, then force-feed them while they're unconscious. And you think this will somehow improve their psychological state. It would keep them alive, Gorth replied, completely missing the point with the accuracy of a stormtrooper. No, Hollis said, turning back to the viewing window where all 3 cubs had now gathered to watch the heated discussion. It would keep their bodies functioning while you systematically destroyed everything that makes them who they are. There's a difference. The largest cub, the female with the golden scales, tilted her head as if considering Hollis's words. Then she did something that made everyone except Hollis take a step back from the window. She smiled. Not a human smile, of course, but the unmistakable expression of a predator recognizing an ally. Her lips pulled back just enough to reveal teeth that could easily punch through the station's hull. But her eyes held warmth. Well, Hollis said, shouldering her bag with renewed purpose. Looks like someone's finally ready to have a real conversation. Commander, Amox started, his tentacles writhing with bureaucratic anxiety. The safety protocols clearly state that direct interaction with the subjects requires... The safety protocols, Hollis interrupted, were written by people who think subjects is an appropriate way to refer to intelligent beings. She headed toward the habitat entrance with the kind of determination that had made her legend among xenobiologists and nightmare among administrators. I'm going in. But the risks, Nexia began. The only risk, Hollis called back over her shoulder, is that we might actually succeed for once. Behind her, she could hear Amox frantically contacting the medical bay, Nexia calculating probability matrices, and Gorth making what sounded like weapons preparation noises. But ahead of her, through the habitat's entrance, 3 pairs of ancient, intelligent eyes watched her approach with something that had been absent from this sterile station for 8 days, 14 hours, and 36 minutes. Hope. The first phase of what would later be recorded in galactic history as either the greatest breakthrough in interspecies relations or the most spectacular failure in conservation science, was about to begin. Hollis preferred to think of it as Tuesday. The habitat's entrance hissed shut behind Hollis with the kind of finality that usually accompanied either great discoveries or spectacular deaths. She stood in the airlock for a moment, listening to the gentle hum of environmental controls and trying to ignore the increasingly frantic chatter from the observation deck behind her. "Hollis, your vital signs are elevated," came Unit 9's synthetic voice through the comm system. "I recommend returning to the observation area for a more thorough risk assessment." "Unit 9, Hollis replied, checking her equipment belt one last time. "My vital signs are elevated because I'm about to walk into a room with 3 starving dragons. That's what humans call appropriate response to circumstances." The inner door cycled open, and Hollis stepped into what was supposed to be a perfect replica of the Drakmore homeworld environment. The designers had done their homework. Rolling hills of crimson grass, crystalline formations that caught and refracted the artificial sunlight, even a small stream that bubbled musically through the space. It was beautiful, professional, and absolutely soulless. The 3 dragon cubs watched her entrance with the kind of attention usually reserved for approaching predators or potential prey. The largest, the female with golden scales that now seemed more bronze in the filtered light, sat perfectly still about 20 feet away. The 2 smaller ones, males, if Hollis's quick assessment was correct, flanked her at careful distances. "Well," Hollis said, settling herself cross-legged on the synthetic grass with the casual confidence of someone who had faced down creatures far more dangerous than baby dragons. "Aren't you 3 the most beautiful disasters I've ever seen?" The comment seemed to catch them off guard. The female's head tilted slightly, and one of the males, the one with scales that shifted from deep red to burnt orange, took a half-step closer before catching himself. I know," Hollis continued, as if they were having a perfectly normal conversation. "Another alien showing up to poke at you and tell you what's best for your own good. I bet you're just thrilled about that prospect." From the observation deck, she could hear Nexia's crystalline voice rising in pitch. "Commander, anthropomorphizing the subjects will only complicate the therapeutic process." "Nexia," Hollis called back without taking her eyes off the cubs, "if you don't stop referring to them as subjects, I'm going to start referring to you as that sparkly thing that won't shut up." The smallest cub, his scales a riot of colors from deep purple to bright gold, made a sound that could have been a laugh or a sneeze. Hollis chose to interpret it as a laugh. "You think that's funny?" she asked him directly. "Wait until you hear my impression of a Zentorian having a bureaucratic crisis." She cleared her throat and began waving her arms in an exaggerated parody of Amox's earlier gestures. "Oh, my cosmic winds! The protocols! The procedures! Someone might actually treat these creatures like individuals instead of data points. Whatever shall we do?" This time, all 3 cubs made the sound. Definitely laughter. "Commander," Amox's voice crackled through the comm with barely contained panic. "This approach seems highly unorthodox." "Amox," Hollis replied, noting that the cub's posture had shifted from defensive to curious. "Orthodox approaches have been failing spectacularly for over a week. I think we can afford to try something radical, like treating them with basic respect." She leaned back on her hands, adopting the most non-threatening posture possible, while still being able to move quickly if necessary. The female cub was studying her with an intensity that made Hollis wonder exactly how much telepathic ability these creatures possessed. "So," she said conversationally, "I hear you 3 have been on a hunger strike." That's either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. And knowing teenagers of any species, it's probably both. The red-orange male took another step closer, his head cocked at an angle that suggested intense concentration. Hollis had seen that look before, usually on psychic species when they were trying to read someone's intentions. "Go ahead," she said softly. "Take a look around in there. You won't find anything you don't like." What happened next would have sent most xenobiologists running for the emergency exits. The cub's eyes began to glow with a soft inner light, and Hollis felt something she could only describe as a gentle presence touching the edges of her consciousness. Not invasive, not demanding, more like a polite knock on a door. Instead of panic, Hollis felt oddly peaceful. She'd always been good with animals, even the non-terrestrial variety, but this was something entirely different. This was communication on a level that transcended species, language, and even basic biology. Images flickered through her mind, not her own memories, but impressions from the cub's perspective. The terror of being separated from family, the confusion of waking up in an artificial environment, the growing anger at being treated like specimens instead of individuals, and underneath it all, a bone-deep loneliness that made Hollis's heart ache. "Oh, you poor baby," she whispered, and the telepathic contact gentled even further. More images came, faster now. The stream of aliens who had approached them over the past week, each one radiating clinical detachment, scientific curiosity, or barely concealed excitement at having such rare subjects to study. The cubs had read every one of them, sensing the true motivations beneath the professional facades. No wonder they'd refused to eat. They weren't just protesting the captivity. They were rejecting the fundamental premise that they existed for the benefit of others. "You've been testing them," Hollis said aloud, her voice filled with admiration. "Every single person who came in here, you took their measure, and every single one of them failed." The golden female rose to her feet with fluid grace and took a step forward. Now Hollis could see the intelligence burning in those ancient eyes, along with something else. A desperate hope that this time might be different. "Commander," Unit 9's voice had taken on what passed for urgency in artificial intelligences. "I'm detecting unusual neural activity from the subjects. Are you experiencing any symptoms of telepathic contact?" "Unit 9, Hollis replied, never breaking eye contact with the approaching dragoness. "I'm experiencing what humans like to call getting to know someone. You should try it sometime." The cub was close enough now that Hollis could feel warmth radiating from her scales. Close enough to see the individual patterns that made her unique. The small scar above her left eye that spoke of adventures in whatever home they'd been stolen from. The way her nostrils flared as she caught Hollis's scent and found it acceptable. "Hello, beautiful," Hollis said softly. "I'm Hollis, and you are definitely not just another specimen, are you?" The dragon's response came not in words, but in a flood of emotion so pure and powerful that Hollis had to blink back tears. Gratitude, relief. And underneath it all, trust so fragile it might shatter if handled incorrectly. "I know," Hollis murmured. "I know you're tired of being disappointed. But I'm not here to study you or catalog you or turn you into someone else's profit margin. I'm here because 3 beautiful, intelligent beings are hurting, and that's not acceptable." She slowly reached into her jacket pocket and withdrew something that made the cub's nostrils flare with interest. A simple energy bar from Earth, the kind she always carried when working in the field. "Now, I know this isn't exactly gourmet dragon cuisine," she said, breaking the bar into small pieces. "But it's real food, made by real people, not synthesized in some lab by people who think nutrition is just a math problem. She held out a piece in her open palm, making no move to force it on anyone. The choice is yours, sweetheart. Always yours. The golden female, and Hollis decided to call her Blaze, because that's exactly what she was, stared at the offered food with an expression that cycled through suspicion, hope, and something that might have been amusement. Then, with infinite care, she stretched out her elegant neck and delicately took the piece from Hollis's palm, with lips that were surprisingly gentle for a creature capable of breathing fire. The observation deck erupted in excited chatter, but Hollis barely heard it. She was too busy watching Blaze chew, thoughtfully, her eyes never leaving Hollis's face, as if she were tasting not just the food, but the intention behind it. After a moment that felt like an eternity, Blaze swallowed and made a soft sound that was unmistakably approval. "Good?" Hollis asked, and was rewarded with what was definitely a nod. The two males had crept closer during this exchange, drawn by the scent of food and their sister's obvious approval. The red-orange one, Cinder, Hollis decided, looked ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble, while the smallest, Flare, seemed torn between hunger and caution. "Come on, boys," Hollis said, breaking off more pieces. "There's plenty to go around, and I promise I won't make you fill out any paperwork first." Cinder approached first, his movements careful and controlled. Like his sister, he took the food gently from Hollis's palm, but his telepathic touch was lighter, more hesitant. Hollis sensed protectiveness in him, a fierce determination to shield his siblings from further harm. "You're the guardian, aren't you?" she said softly, and felt his surprise at being so easily understood. Always watching out for the others. That's a heavy burden for someone so young. Flare was the last to approach, and when he did, it was with the boundless curiosity of youth, overriding caution. His telepathic touch was the strongest of the three, and Hollis caught flashes of homesickness so intense it was almost overwhelming. "Oh, sweetheart," she breathed, offering him the largest piece of the energy bar. "You miss home so much, don't you?" As Flare ate, Hollis felt the telepathic connection expand to include all three cubs. Suddenly, she was experiencing their shared memories, not just the recent trauma of capture and imprisonment, but glimpses of their life before. A vast cavern system filled with ancient knowledge, adult dragons whose wisdom spanned centuries, a family torn apart by beings who saw them only as prizes to be claimed. The truth hit her like a physical blow. "They're not orphans," she said aloud, her voice carrying clearly to the observation deck. "They're not orphans at all." The excited chatter from behind the viewing window stopped abruptly. "Commander!" Amox's voice was carefully controlled. "The cubs were found alone in an abandoned cavern system. All evidence suggests you found exactly what you were meant to find," Hollis interrupted, rising to her feet with the cubs clustering around her like oversized, scaly puppies. "Because their parents sacrificed themselves to hide these three, and you idiots walked right into a trap designed to protect the next generation." Through the telepathic link, she felt confirmation of her suspicions. The adult dragons had created an elaborate deception, making it appear as though they had died protecting a hidden nursery. In reality, they had allowed themselves to be captured to ensure their children remained free. Except the children hadn't remained free. Someone had betrayed the plan. "Moreover," Hollis continued, her voice taking on the dangerous quiet that had made her legendary in certain diplomatic circles, "I'm getting some very interesting impressions about how exactly these cubs came to be here. And let me tell you, the official story has more holes than a meteorite-damaged hull." She looked down at the three young dragons, who were now pressed against her sides with a trust that was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. Through their shared connection, she felt their confusion and pain at being separated from their family, their growing realization that the beings who had taken them had no intention of ever letting them go home. "Blaze, Cinder, Flare," she said, naming them aloud for the first time, and feeling their surprise at being treated as individuals with identities rather than specimens with numbers. "I think it's time we had a serious conversation about exactly what happened to you and where your parents really are." The response that came through the telepathic link made Hollis's blood run cold. The cubs didn't just know where their parents were, they could feel them, even across the vast distances of space. Feel them suffering, feel them calling out for their children, and feel them dying, slowly, in the hands of beings who cared nothing for their pain. "Amex," Hollis called back to the observation deck, her voice carrying the kind of authority that had once made fleet admirals reconsider their battle plans. "I think you and I need to have a very detailed discussion about the chain of custody for these cubs. Right now." Through the viewing window, she could see the Zentaurian director's tentacles go rigid with what might have been fear or guilt. Probably both. The cubs sensed her rising anger and pressed closer, their own emotions a mixture of hope and determination. For the first time since their capture, they weren't alone. For the first time, someone understood not just what had been done to them, but what needed to be done about it. The second phase of what would later be known as the Drakmore incident was about to begin, and Station Director Amox was starting to realize that bringing in Commander Hollis might have been the biggest mistake of his career. Or, depending on which side of galactic law he ended up on, the last mistake he'd ever make. The administrative offices of the Galactic Conservation Station had clearly been designed by someone who believed that intimidation was an acceptable substitute for competence. Hollis sat across from Director Amox's imposing desk, flanked by the three dragon cubs who had refused to leave her side, while the Zentaurian desperately tried to maintain his authority in the face of increasingly damning evidence. "Commander," Amox began, his forearms arranging and rearranging data tablets with the nervous energy of someone trying to reorganize the deck chairs on a sinking starship. "I understand your emotional attachment to the subjects, but we must consider the broader implications of—" "Stop calling them subjects," Hollis interrupted, absently stroking Flare's head, as the youngest cub dozed against her leg. The others had positioned themselves strategically, Blaze at her right shoulder, alert and ready, while Cinder maintained watch by the door. "They have names, personalities, and families. Start using them." Through the telepathic link that had grown stronger over the past few hours, Hollis felt the cubs' mixture of gratitude and amusement at her protective stance. They were getting used to having someone fight for them, and the novelty hadn't worn off yet. "Very well," Amox said, his voice tight with bureaucratic frustration. Blaze, Cinder, and Flare were discovered in what appeared to be an abandoned nursery cave on Drakmore Prime. Our archaeological team found clear evidence of recent habitation, but no sign of adult dragons. Standard protocol required us to— "Standard protocol," Hollis said, accepting the data tablet that Blaze nudged toward her with her snout. "Seems to have some interesting gaps." She'd spent the last 3 hours reviewing the official reports, while the cubs fed properly for the first time in over a week. Not on synthesized proteins or carefully calculated nutritional matrices, but on real food that Hollis had requested from the station's emergency supplies. Dried fruits, nuts, some of the meat rations that she'd seasoned with herbs from her personal kit. Simple food, prepared with care and offered with respect. The cubs had eaten like the growing children they were, and with proper nutrition came renewed energy, which they were now using to help Hollis piece together exactly how they'd ended up as prisoners on this station. For instance, Hollis continued, scrolling through the archaeological report, your team managed to locate this supposedly abandoned cave system with remarkable precision, almost as if they had inside information about its location. Amox's tentacles twitched, definitely not in a good way. Our survey teams are highly trained professionals. I'm sure they are, but even highly trained professionals usually need more than 6 hours to locate a hidden cave system on a planet with approximately 48 1,000,000 square kilometers of surface area. Hollis looked up from the tablet with the expression of someone who had caught her opponent in checkmate. Unless, of course, someone told them exactly where to look. The cubs stirred restlessly, their shared emotions bleeding through the telepathic link. Anger, betrayal, and underneath it all, a bone-deep sadness that their trust had been so carelessly violated. Moreover, Hollis continued, I find it fascinating that your archaeological team was equipped with specialized dragon-handling equipment. Sonic dampeners, telepathic inhibitors, even juvenile-sized containment units. That's either remarkable foresight or suspicious preparation. The Galactic Conservation Corps maintains equipment for all known sapient species, Amox replied, but his voice lacked conviction. All known species, yes. But the Drakmor ancients were supposedly extinct. So why would you have juvenile containment units specifically designed for dragons that weren't supposed to exist? Silence fell over the office like a burial shroud. Through the viewing window, Hollis could see other station personnel going about their daily routines, blissfully unaware that their director was being systematically dismantled by a human and 3 increasingly agitated dragon cubs. Cinder made a low sound that wasn't quite a growl, but wasn't exactly friendly either. His telepathic touch carried images, flashes of the capture that the cubs had shared with each other during their imprisonment. Adult dragons fighting desperately to protect their young. The betrayer's face, hidden behind environmental armor. The sound of his voice, promising safety, and instead delivering captivity. They remember him, Hollis said quietly. The one who led your team to the cave. They remember his voice. Amox went very still. Even his tentacles stopped their nervous writhing. I think, Hollis continued, standing slowly so as not to disturb the cubs, it's time we had an honest conversation about what this station really is, Director. Because I'm getting the distinct impression that conservation isn't your primary mission. What happened next would have been comical if it weren't so predictable. Amox reached for what was undoubtedly an emergency alert, probably intending to summon security and contain the situation before it got any further out of hand. He never got the chance. Blaze moved with the fluid grace of a natural predator, placing herself between Amox and his control panel with a sound that could generously be called a warning and more accurately be described as a promise. Her scales had shifted to a deep amber that meant business, and her eyes held the kind of focus that suggested someone was about to have a very bad day. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Hollis said conversationally. Blaze is very protective of her family, and after 8 days of being treated like a specimen, she's got quite a bit of frustration to work out. This is ridiculous, Amox sputtered, his bureaucratic composure finally cracking. You can't threaten a station director with— I'm not threatening anyone, Hollis replied. I'm simply observing that 3 telepathically gifted, highly intelligent young dragons are getting increasingly upset about being lied to. And when dragons get upset, well— She shrugged. Let's just say your insurance premiums are about to go through the roof. As if to emphasize the point, Cinder padded over to join his sister. The temperature in the room rose noticeably. "You want to know what I think, Amex?" Hollis settled back into her chair with the casual confidence of someone holding all the winning cards. "I think this whole conservation station is a front. I think you're running a very lucrative side business in rare and exotic creatures, and 3 baby dragons just became your biggest potential payday ever." The Zentorian's silence was answer enough. "The question is," Hollis continued, "who's buying? Because dragons aren't exactly impulse purchases. Someone with very deep pockets and very specific tastes placed an order, didn't they?" Through the telepathic link, she felt the cubs' growing understanding of their situation. They'd suspected they were being prepared for sale, but hearing it confirmed brought a surge of rage that made the air in the office shimmer with heat. Flair, the youngest and most emotional, let out a sound that was part whimper, part roar. His scales flickered through a rainbow of colors, settling on a deep red that matched his siblings' angry amber. "Easy, sweetheart," Hollis murmured, extending her hand toward him. The cub pressed his nose against her palm, seeking comfort from the only being who had shown him genuine care since his capture. "We're going to fix this. I promise." "You can't promise anything," Amok said, his voice tight with desperation. "Even if what you're suggesting were true, which I'm not admitting, you're one person against an entire station, against buyers who have resources you can't imagine, against a corrupt system that treats intelligent beings like commodities," Hollis finished. "Yeah, I've been up against worse odds before. And I've never had 3 dragon allies before." She stood again, the cubs rising with her in perfect synchronization. The bond between them had grown stronger over the past few hours, fed by mutual trust and shared purpose. Through the telepathic link, Hollis could feel their absolute faith in her, their willingness to follow her anywhere, to fight any battle if it meant seeing their parents again. It was humbling and terrifying in equal measure. "Here's what's going to happen, Amex," she said, moving toward the door with the cubs flanking her like an honor guard. "You're going to give me full access to the station's communication logs. You're going to tell me exactly where the adult dragons are being held, and you're going to explain exactly how much you were planning to sell these children for." "And if I refuse?" Hollis paused at the door and turned back with a smile that had absolutely nothing to do with humor. "Then Blaze, Cinder, and Flare are going to have a very educational conversation with the station's life support systems. Dragons are remarkably talented at modifying atmospheric conditions, and I suspect your environmental controls weren't designed to handle directed thermal manipulation." The cubs' scales brightened appreciatively. They were learning to enjoy their humans' creative problem-solving methods. "You're talking about sabotage," Amox whispered. "I'm talking about 3 children who want to go home to their parents," Hollis corrected. "Everything else is just details." As if, summoned by her words, the office door chimed and slid open to reveal Unit 9, the synthetic intelligence that had been monitoring their earlier interactions. The AI's humanoid form stepped into the room with mechanical precision, its optical sensors focusing immediately on the cubs. "Director Amox," Unit 9 announced in its perfectly modulated voice, "I have received priority communications from the Draconian Acquisitions Syndicate. They are inquiring about the status of their special order." The room went dead silent. Even the station's ambient noise seemed to fade as the implications of Unit 9's words sank in. "The Draconian Acquisitions Syndicate," Hollis repeated slowly. "The same syndicate that's been suspected of illegal creature trafficking for the past decade? The one that specializes in selling rare sapient species to private collectors?" Unit 9's head tilted with mechanical curiosity. I was not aware that information was classified. Yes, that is correct. They are expecting delivery of 3 juvenile Drachmore specimens within the next 48 hours. The cub's reaction was immediate and intense. All 3 began to glow with an inner fire, their scales shifting to colors that hurt to look at directly. The temperature in the room spiked so rapidly that the environmental controls began shrieking warnings. "Well," Hollis said, her voice cutting through the chaos with deadly calm, "I guess that answers that question." She turned to Amox, who had gone a sickly shade of blue and was frantically gesturing at Unit 9 to stop talking. 48 hours, Director. That's not much time to arrange transport to wherever you've got their parents stashed away." "Commander, you don't understand the forces you're dealing with." "I understand perfectly," Hollis interrupted. "I understand that you've been trafficking in intelligent children. I understand that you've separated them from their families. And I understand that you have exactly 46 hours to fix this situation before I let 3 very angry dragons express their feelings about your hospitality." She paused, considering. "Actually, make that 45 hours. I want to leave ourselves some wiggle room." The cubs pressed closer to her, their combined telepathic presence a warm, fierce comfort in her mind. Through their shared bond, she felt their absolute trust in her ability to reunite them with their family, their complete faith that she would never betray them the way so many others had. It was the kind of trust that could move mountains, or, in this case, the kind of trust that could tear apart corrupt bureaucracies and illegal trafficking operations. The third phase of the Drachmore incident was about to begin, and Director Amox was beginning to realize that his carefully constructed criminal enterprise was about to meet its match in one determined human and 3 children who refused to be anyone's merchandise. Outside the office windows, the stars wheeled in, their eternal dance, indifferent to the small drama playing out on the station. But somewhere among those distant lights, adult dragons waited in captivity for children who were no longer willing to accept their fate quietly. And time was running out for everyone. 43 hours later, Hollis discovered that breaking out of a galactic conservation station while accompanied by 3 increasingly powerful dragon cubs was significantly easier than anyone had anticipated. Mainly because the cubs had spent their captivity learning the station's layout through their telepathic abilities, and nobody had bothered to shield the facility against creatures who could sense electrical currents through walls. "Left at the next junction," Blaze whispered, her scales dim to avoid detection as they crept through the maintenance corridors. 3 guards, but they're more interested in their card game than actual security. Hollis grinned despite their precarious situation. Over the past day and a half, she'd managed to extract the location of the adult dragons from an increasingly desperate Amox, a black site research facility on Drachmore Prime's largest moon. She'd also discovered that Captain Wren, the station's transport pilot, had been having serious second thoughts about her employer's business practices. "The thing is," Wren had confided over coffee in the station's mess hall, "I got into shipping to see the galaxy, not to traffic in stolen children, even alien children." Now Captain Wren was warming up her transport ship, while Hollis and the cubs made their way toward the docking bay. The plan was simple: steal a ship, rescue the parents, reunite the family, and let the Galactic Council sort out the legal mess afterward. The cubs had enthusiastically embraced their roles as tiny insurgents. Cinder had discovered he could overload security sensors with focused heat bursts, while Flair's curiosity had led him to master the art of opening locked doors by melting their control circuits. Blaze, meanwhile, had appointed herself mission commander and was proving remarkably good at strategy for someone who wasn't supposed to exist. The docking bay was exactly where the Cubs said it would be, and Captain Wren's ship hummed with barely contained eagerness for launch. What Hollis hadn't expected was the reception committee waiting for them. "Commander Hollis," Director Amox called out, flanked by a dozen security officers and looking like a being who had finally decided to stop pretending he was one of the good guys. "I really can't allow you to leave with station property." "Station property?" Hollis stepped forward, the Cubs spreading out behind her in a formation that suggested they'd been planning this moment. "Is that really what you want your last words to be?" The Cubs began to glow. Not the gentle warmth they'd shown in the habitat, but the focused fury of predators who had finally found their targets. The temperature in the docking bay spiked so rapidly that the security officers' weapons began smoking in their hands. "You have 10 seconds to stand down," Blaze said, speaking aloud for the first time since her capture, her voice carrying harmonics that made the station's hull ring like a bell. And then we stopped being polite. What followed was less a battle, and more a demonstration in why ancient dragon species had survived for millennia, despite the best efforts of the galaxy's various civilizations. The Cubs moved like liquid fire, their telepathic coordination allowing them to act as a single entity while their individual abilities complemented each other perfectly. When the smoke cleared, Amox and his security team were unconscious but unharmed. The Cubs had been very specific about wanting justice, not revenge. The transport ship's engines were already cycling up for departure. "Next stop," Captain Wren announced over the comm as they broke orbit. "One family reunion, coming right up." The research facility on Drakmor Prime's moon surrendered without firing a shot when 3 adult dragons, freed by their children's coordinated assault on the facility's power grid, emerged from captivity with the kind of rage that could melt starship hulls. The reunion between parents and children was conducted in the ancient dragon language, a symphony of harmonics that made nearby mountains resonate in sympathy. Hollis stood apart, giving the family privacy, while Captain Wren dealt with the arrival of Galactic Council enforcement ships. "You did well, Heart-Sister," Obsidian said, approaching Hollis with the fluid grace of a predator who no longer needed to fear anything. "Our children speak of you as family." "They are family," Hollis replied simply. "Anyone who tries to separate them again will have to go through me first." Crimson, the father, lowered his massive head until he was eye-level with the small human who had saved his children. "The Drakmor ancients do not forget debts of honor, Hollis of Earth. You will always have a place among our clan." 6 months later, Hollis received a package at her retirement cottage on Luna Colony. Inside was a scale from each of the Cubs, now healthy, happy, and back where they belonged, along with a message in perfectly scripted galactic standard. "Thank you for teaching us that sometimes the simplest approach is the most revolutionary one. Love, Blaze, Cinder, and Flare. P.S. Director Amox sends his regards from prison." Hollis smiled, filing the scales carefully alongside her other mementos from a career spent proving that the universe was always more complicated and more wonderful than anyone expected. Outside her window, the Earth turned in its ancient dance, and somewhere among the stars, 3 dragon cubs were learning to fly.